If you or someone you know has diabetes, you may have built up an extra supply of test strips and lancets. That's where we come in. We'll buy the supplies that you don't need and resell them to those in need to prevent waste. Help us make diabetes management more affordable. Visit us at teststripswithaz.com.
All right, Mike Heck here, broadcasting from the command center, which is in shambles right now because we're getting ready to move into the new house that is being renovated on right now. So if you see mattresses and box springs and boxes and crumpled up toys all over the place, that's why. Apologies. I know it's not aesthetically pleasing, but this is where we're at right now. We got to deal with it. I got to deal with it, and unfortunately you have to deal with it too. But we're back for another episode of Behind the Links, talking about what we discussed on Between the Links, the panel anyways. I ask the questions. I don't normally weigh in on a lot of this stuff, but this is why we do this here on the channel. Ben Askren announced his retirement for the second time from mixed martial arts, but this time it's probably for good. I have a hard time believing Ben Askren will be coming back to grace the octagon or any other cage with his presence in a competitive capacity after announcing on Monday that he needs a hip replacement, and that's it. He's all done. Now, I will say this, it took a long time for Ben Askren to get to the UFC. I don't feel like he owes anybody anything. I tweeted that out, and I stand by that. I don't think any fighter owes us anything, or you anything, or me anything. Ben Askren certainly doesn't. Guy came into the UFC undefeated, got a crazy first UFC fight, and a win over Robbie Lawler. Then, of course, the Masvidal loss, Damian Maia loss, but for a guy who went 1-2 in the UFC, I don't know if it's possible to make a bigger impact than Ben Askren did in the UFC. He made things very exciting in 2019. It's unfortunate for him he didn't get to accomplish the goal he wanted of being the best in the world, but man, to do what he did and peak interest like he did in 2019, it's hard to do it better than he did. So my proverbial hat gets tipped to you, Mr. Ben Askren. Where does Jan Blachowicz go following his win at UFC Sao Paulo over Jacare Souza? Honestly, not really anywhere. I mean, I have all these expressions, but nothing really to say. He didn't really improve his stock at all, if we're being honest. I mean, it was a win, and a win is always great, double the money, but in terms of what's going on at 205, as interesting as it's been in a long time, he's certainly not getting a title shot. I don't even know if he's earned a shot against Cory Anderson. Maybe an Anthony Smith. I actually would rather see Anthony Smith and Cory Anderson fight. Let Jan Blachowicz fight somebody else. I mean, what do you do? I don't know. It's a little log jammed right now. I think Blachowicz took a step back even with the win. I think Cory Anderson versus Anthony Smith's got some heat there. I don't know if Anthony Smith gets the title shot with the win, but it certainly improves his chances. But if you do Cory Anderson versus Jan Blachowicz, I'm fine with that too. But in terms of him jumping Dominic Reyes or jumping Cory Anderson, he certainly didn't do it on Saturday. Charles DuBronx Oliveira, my God, what a savage he is. 6 wins in a row, 6 finishes in a row as he defeated Jared Gordon with a nasty knockout in the first round on Saturday at UFC Sao Paulo. Let's get this guy a top 10 fight, for God's sakes. I mean, what else does he have to do? Jared Gordon is as tough as they come. His story is incredible, and I understand in a way why they made this matchup, because they thought, Oliveira might get pressed a little bit, but I mean, the fight went exactly the way people expected it to. That's why he was nearly a 4-1 favorite in this fight. And Jared Gordon's super tough, super durable, but he's just on another level right now. He's on a tear, and it's time to give him a step up in competition. I'm not talking about fighting the number 15 guy in the division. I'm talking about a top 10 guy. I'm talking about the Kevin Lees of the world. I'm talking about a rematch with Paul Felder. I'm talking about fights like that. He deserves a fight like that, doesn't he? 6 finishes in a row? Agreeing with the champion of Between the Links this past week, Craig Allen, I'd like to see Charles Oliveira versus Kevin Lee. I know Kevin Lee wants to fight Islam Makhachev, but again, he wants tough fights. Kevin Lee wants tough fights. He said he wants the toughest fights he can find. Be hard-pressed to find a tougher fight than Charles DuBronx Oliveira right now. Everybody's high on that guy, and a win over Charles Oliveira would do big things for Kevin Lee now that he's back at 155 pounds, and a win over Kevin Lee would do big things for Charles Oliveira. Seems like a perfect matchup to me. James Krause won his 6th consecutive fight on Saturday. If we're not counting the Ultimate Fighter fights, I'm not really counting them. 6 in a row sounds good to me in the octagon. Getting a knockout win over Sergio Moraes with about 19 seconds left in that fight. Krause looked phenomenal. Huge second round, won the first round, dominated the third round. He just continues to get better and better. So the question on Between the Links was, is James Krause the most underrated fighter on the roster? And if not, where does he rank in that discussion? And I think he's in the top 3. He's definitely an undervalued fighter. No doubt about that. He deserves a step up in competition as well. And there are some definite underrated fighters in the UFC right now. I think one of those guys, even though he's 2-2 in his last 4 fights, Lyman Good is an underrated fighter. How about that? Lyman Good's a welterweight, just came off a big finish win over Chance Rencounter at UFC 244. James Krause, underrated guy, coming off a big finish win at UFC Sao Paulo. I know Krause isn't ready to jump back in the cage like next week or next month or maybe even 2 months from now, but Lyman Good versus James Krause sounds like a good fight to me. Lyman's got 5 fights in the UFC now. I know he fought Damian Maia back in February, but I think him and James Krause would be a pretty good matchup for the guy that's no longer the underrated fighter. I like that idea. A lot of fights have been booked for 2020 right now, a lot of exciting matchups. But I'd say the most recent fight announcements, it's hard to argue that the best one of all it's got to be Cory Sanheim versus Frankie Edgar. The intrigue around that fight is incredible. Sanhagen's a top 5 guy, one of the most dangerous guys in that division. Kind of a surprising matchup for Frankie Edgar to take, because you kind of expected Frankie to take like a bigger name. And I think Cory Sanheim, I think he would say this himself, I think he's probably the most dangerous fight in that division right now. One, because of the name value, and Sanheim definitely has a lot of respect amongst the hardcore watchers of the sport. But everybody knows who Frankie Edgar is. And this would be a huge coup for Cory Sanheim. It definitely would cement his place atop that division to get himself a title shot. Maybe he wouldn't be the very first guy to fight Henry Cejudo upon his return, but definitely if Cory Sanheim goes out and has an impressive performance against Frankie Edgar, Cory Sanhagen's next fight will be for the belt. I think that's the only way to do it. And if Frankie Edgar wins, guess what's going to happen? He's going to fight for the belt next as well. So, it's a great fight. It's a great fight. This is something his coach Mark Henry's been wanting to do for a while. Drop to 135. Now he's doing it. Now he gets a tough matchup. As tough as you can get at 135. So if Frankie Edgar wins, he's fighting for the belt. Cory Sanheim wins, he's fighting for the belt in 2020 as well. It's a great fight. And that's it, everybody. Make sure you subscribe to the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever you find your favorite podcast. Big shout out to Nolan King from MMA Junkie for joining the panel. And Damon Martin from MMAfighting.com is going to be back on the panel this week to talk about the big news going on. No UFC for the next 2 weeks, but the beauty of the sport, there's always stuff to talk about. So make sure you subscribe to the network. My name is Mike Heck. We'll see you back here next week as we go back once again behind the links. And we'll see you Monday night as we go once again between the links.